In this class, we will study Shakespearean stage and Romeo and Juliet. This unit will help to understand Romeo and Juliet in detail. First, the characters have been discussed in short and then in detail. The detailed reading of the summary will help them understand the play and its thematic concerns. That will be followed by the discussion of the different themes of the play. Now we'll see the list of characters. First is Romeo. Romeo is the son and heir of Montague and Lady Montague. He is a young man of about 16. He is handsome, intelligent, and sensitive, though impulsive and immature. His idealism and passion make him an extremely likable character. He lives in the middle of a violent feud between his family and the Capulets, but he is not at all interested in violence. His only interest is love. At the beginning of the play, he is madly in love with a woman married, Rosalind. But the instant he lays eyes on Juliet, he falls in love with her. He falls in love with her and forgets Rosalind. Thus, Shakespeare gives us very reason to question how real Romeo's new love is. But Romeo goes to extremes to prove the seriousness of his feelings. He secretly marries Juliet, the daughter of his father's worst enemy. He happily takes abuse from Tybalt, and he would rather die than live without his beloved. Romeo is also an affectionate and devoted friend to his relative Benvolio, Mercutio, and Fry Lawrence. Then second we have Juliet. Juliet is the daughter of Capulet and Lady Capulet. She is a beautiful 13-year-old girl. She begins the play as a naive child who has who has though who has thought little about love and marriage. Who has thought little about love and marriage, but she grows up quickly upon falling in love with Romeo, the son of her family's great enemy. Because she is a girl in an aristocratic family, she has none of the freedom Romeo has to roam around the city, climb over climb over walls in the middle of the night, or get into sword fights. Nevertheless, she shows amazing courage in trusting her entire life and future to Romeo, even refusing to believe the worst reports about him after he gets involved in a fight with a cousin. Juliet's closest friend and confidant is a nurse, though she is willing to shut the nurse out of her life the moment the nurse turns against Romeo. Then third we have Friar Lawrence. Friar is a Franciscan friar. He is a friend to both Romeo and Juliet. He is kind, civic-minded, and a proponent of moderation. Friar Lawrence secretly marries the impassioned lovers in hopes that the union might eventually bring peace to Verona. Being a Catholic holy man, Friar Lawrence is also an expert in the use of seemingly mystical potions and herbs. Then fourth we have Mercutio. Mercutio is a kinsman to the prince and Romeo's close friend. He is one of the most extraordinary characters in all of Shakespeare's plays. Mercutio overflows with imagination, wit, and a strange, biting satire and brooding fervor. He loves wordplay, especially sexual double entendres. He can be quite hot-headed and hates people who are affected, pretentious, or obsessed with the latest passions. He finds Romeo's romanticized ideas about love tiresome, so he tries to convince Romeo to view love as a simple matter of sexual appetite. Then the fifth we have the nurse. She is Juliet's nurse. She is the woman who breastfed Juliet when she was a baby and has cared for Juliet all her entire life. She is a vulgar, long-winded, and sentimental character. The nurse provides comic relief with her frequently inappropriate remarks and speeches. But until a disagreement near the play's end, the nurse is Juliet's confident and loyal intermediary in Juliet's affair with Romeo. She provides a contrast with Juliet. Her view of love is earthy and sexual, whereas Juliet is idealistic and intense. The nurse believes in love and wants Juliet to have a nice looking husband. But the idea that Juliet would want to sacrifice herself for love is incomprehensible to her. Then, sixth, we have Tybalt. Tybalt is one of the family members of Capulet. He is Juliet's cousin on her mother's side. He is vain, fashionable, and supremely aware of courtesy and the lack of it. He becomes aggressive, violent, and quick to draw his sword when he feels his pride has been injured. Once drawn, his sword is something to be feared. He loathes Montagues. Then seventh we have Lord Capulet. Capulet is the patriarch of the Capulet family, father of Juliet, husband of Lady Capulet, and enemy for unexplained reasons of Montague. He truly loves his daughter, though he is not well acquainted with Juliet's thoughts or feelings. He seems to think that what is best for her is a good match with Paris. Often prudent, he commands respect and propriety, but he is liable to fly into a rage where either is lacking. When either is lacking. Then eighth we have Lady Capulet. She is Juliet's mother and Capulet's wife, a woman who herself married young. By her own estimation, she gave birth to Juliet at close to the age of 14. She is eager to see her daughter marry Paris. She is an infatual mother, relying on the nurse for moral and pragmatic support. Then ninth we have Lord Montaigne. He is Romeo's father, the patriarch of the Montague clan and bitter enemy of Capulet. At the beginning of the play, he is chiefly concerned about Romeo's melancholy. Then tenth we have Lady Montaigne. She is Romeo's mother and Montague's wife. She dies of grief after Romeo is exiled from Verona. Then 11th we have Count Paris. He is a kinsman of the prince and the suitor of Juliet most preferred by Capulet. Once Capulet has promised him he can marry Juliet, he behaves very presumptuous toward acting as if they were already married. Then 12th is Benvolio. He is Montague's nephew and Romeo's cousin and thoughtful friend. He makes a genuine effort to diffuse violent scenes in public places. Though Mercutio accuses him of having a nasty temper in private, he spends most of the play trying to help Romeo get his mind off Rosaline, even after Romeo has fallen in love with Juliet. Then 13th we have Prince Scalus. He is the Prince of Verona and a kinsman of Mercutio and Paris. As the seat of political power in Verona, he is concerned about maintaining the public peace at all cost. Then 14th we have Friar John. Friar is a Franciscan friar charged by Friar Lawrence with taking the news of Juliet's false death to Romeo in Mantua. Friar John is held up in a quarantined house and the message never reaches Romeo. Then we have Balthazar, who is a Romeo's dedicated servant who brings Romeo the news of Juliet's death. He is unaware that her death is a ruse. Then we have Samson and Gregory. They are two servants of the house of Capulet who, like their master, hate the Montagues. At the outset of the play, they successfully provoke some Montague men into a fight. Then we have Abraham. He is Montague's servant who fights with Samson and Gregory in the first scene of the play. Then we have the apothecary. He is an apothecary in Mantua who looks like skeleton, and had been wealthier, he might have been able to afford to value his morals more than money, and refused to sell poison to Romeo. Then we have Peter. He is a Capulet servant who invites guests to Capulet's feast and escorts the nurse to meet with Romeo. He is illiterate and a bad singer. Then we have Rosalind. She is the woman with whom Romeo is infatuated at the beginning of the play. Rosalind never appears on stage, but it is said by other characters that she is very beautiful and has sworn to live a life of chastity. Then we have the chorus. The chorus is a single character who, as developed in Greek drama, functions as a narrator, offering commentary on the play's plot and themes. Then we have Petruchio. Then we have Chief Watchman, and then we have Citizens of the Watch. Now we will see act-wise summary and analysis. So in the prologue, the chorus introduces the play and tells the audience that two families in Verona have reignited an ancient feud. Two lovers One from each family commits suicide after trying to run away from their families. The loss of the children compels the families to end the feud. So in the Act 1, Scene 1, the servants Capulets are on the street waiting for some servants of the Montagues to arrive. When they do, Samson from the Capulets bites his thumb at them, essentially a strong insult. Abraham from the Montagues accepts the insult and the men starts to fight. Benvolio, Romeo's cousin, enters and makes the men stop fighting by drawing his own sword. Then Tybalt, Juliet's cousin, then also enters the street. Seeing Benvolio, he too draws his sword and enters the fight. Old Capulet returns. Old Capulet runs onto the stage and demands a sword so that he too may fight. His wife restrains him, even when old Montague emerges with his sword drawn as well. The citizens of the watch have put up a cry and managed to get Prince Escalus to arrive. The prince chides them for 3 times before causing the street of Verona to be unsafe. He orders them to return home and personally accompanies the Capulets. The Montagues and Benvolio remain on stage. They ask Benvolio why Romeo was not with him. He tells them that Romeo has been in a strange mood lately. When Romeo appears, the Montagues ask Benvolio to find out what is wrong and then depart. Romeo informs Benvolio that he is in love with a woman named Rosaline, who wishes to remain chaste for the rest of her life, which is why he is so depressed. Then in scene 2, Paris pleads with Capulet to let him marry Juliet, who is still only a girl of 13. Capulet tells him to wait, but decides to allow Paris to woo her and try to win her heart. He then tells his servant Peter to take a list of names and invite the people to a masked ball he is hosting that evening. Then Peter meets Romeo on the street and, being unable to read, asks Romeo to help read the list for him. Romeo does and realizes that the girl he loves, Rosaline, will be attending this party. So Peter tells him that it will be held at Capulet's house and that he is invited if he wishes to come. Both Benvolio and Romeo decide to go. Then in scene 3, Lady Capulet asks the nurse to call for Juliet. She does and then tells Lady Capulet that Juliet will be 14 in 2 weeks. She then disgraces and speaks of how Juliet was as a child, causing both Juliet and her mother embarrassment. The mother tells Juliet that Paris has come to marry her. She then describes Paris as being beautiful and compares him to a fine book that only lacks a cover. Juliet does not promise anything but agrees to at least look at the man that night at dinner. Then in scene 4, Romeo, Mercutio and Benvolio are making their way to the masked party. Romeo is still depressed. Even though he gets to see Rosaline, Mercutio tries to cheer him up by telling a story about Queen Mab, a fictitious elf that infiltrates men's dreams. Romeo finally slushes him and comments that he is afraid of the consequences of going to his party. Then in scene 5, Romeo stands to the side during the dancing and it is a form that the spot that he first sees Juliet. He immediately falls in love with her. Then Tybalt overhears Romeo talking to a serving man and recognizes him as Romeo Montague by his voice. Now, however, before Tybalt can create a scene, old Capulet tells him to leave Romeo alone, since it would look bad to have a brawl in the middle of the festivities. So Romeo finds Juliet and touches her hand. They speak in sonnet form to one another, and Romeo eventually gets to kiss her. However, Juliet is forced to go to see her mother. The nurse tells Romeo that Julio is a Capulet, at which he is startled. Now Juliet finds a nurse at the end of the party and begs her to find out who Romeo is. The nurse returns and tells her he is Romeo, the only son of the Montague family. Now Juliet is heartbroken that she loves her loathed enemy. Now we will see analysis of Act 1. So this play begins with a sonnet, a form of prose usually reserved for a lover addressing his beloved. This sonnet is a very structured form of prose, lending itself to order. Then Shakespeare cleverly contrasts this orderly sonnet with the immediate disorder of the first scene. Thus, the scene quickly degenerates into a bunch of quarreling servants who soon provoke a fight between the houses of Montague and Capulet. Now, this scene is wrought with sexual overtones, with the various servants speaking of raping the enemy's woman. The sexual wordplay will continue throughout the play, becoming extremely bawdy and at times offensive. Yet also underlying the love affair between Romeo and Juliet. The disorder within the play is evidenced by inverted circumstances. Servants start the quarrel but soon draw the nobleman into the brawl. The young men enter the fight, but soon the old men try to deny the age and fight as well. The fact that this whole scene takes place in broad daylight undermines the security that is supposed to exist during the day. So thus the play deals with conflicting images, servants leading nobleman, old age pretending to be young, and day overtaking night. So the nurse also foreshadows, and I might live to see the married ones. She unquotes. Naturally, she does not expect this to be realized in so short a time, but indeed, she does live to only see Juliet married once. Then Romeo compares Juliet to a rich jewel in an Ethiop's ear when he first sees her. This play on the comparison of dark and light shows up frequently in subsequent scenes. It is a central part of their love that important love scenes take place in the dark, away from the disorder of the day. The Romeo loves Juliet at night but kills Tybalt during the day. It especially shows up in the first act in the way Romeo shuts out the daylight while he is spinning for Rosalind. In the fifth scene, the lovers share a sonnet which uses imagery of saints and pilgrims, and this relates to the fact that Romeo means pilgrim in Italian. It is also a sacrilegious sonnet, for Juliet becomes a saint to be kissed and Romeo a holy traveler. So the foreshadowing so common in all of Shakespeare's plays comes from Juliet near the end of the first act. She states, she quotes, "If he be married, my grave is like to be my wedding bed," she unquotes. This will be related over and over again from her nurse and later even from Lady Capitoline. Now, one of the remarkable aspects of the play is the transformation of both Romeo and Juliet after they fall in love. Juliet first comes across as a young, innocent girl who obeys her parents' commands. However, by the last scene, she is devious and highly focused. Thus, she asks her nurse about three separate men at the party, saving Romeo for last so as not to arouse suspicion. Romeo will undergo a similar transformation in the second act, resulting in Mercutio commenting that he has become sociable. Now, there is a strange biblical reference which comes from Benvolio in the very first scene when he attempts to halt the fight. He remarks, put up your swords, you know not what you do." And this is the same phrase used by Jesus when he stops his apostles from fighting the Roman guards during his arrest. It seems to preordain Juliet's demise, namely her 3-day death, followed by a resurrection which still ultimately ends in death. So now we'll see the act 2. The chorus introduces the next act, saying that Romeo has given up his old desire for a new affection. Juliet is likewise described as being in love. Both lovers share the problem that they cannot see each other without risking death, but the chorus indicates that passion will overcome that hurdle. So now in Act 2, Scene 1, Romeo enters and leaps over a garden wall. Mercutio and Benvolio arrive looking for Romeo, but cannot see him. Mercutio then call out to him in long speech filled with obscene wordplay. Benvolio finally gets tired of searching for Romeo and they leave. Romeo has meanwhile succeeded in hiding beneath Juliet's balcony. She appears on a balcony and in this famous scene asks, "O Romeo, O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?" She wishes that Romeo's name did not make him her enemy. Romeo, hiding below her, surprises her by interrupting and telling Juliet that he loves her. Juliet warns Romeo that his protestations of love had better be real ones since she has fallen in love with him and does not want to be hurt. Romeo swears by himself that he loves her, and Juliet tells him that she wishes she could go him her love again. Juliet's nurse calls her and she disappears only to quickly reappear again. Juliet informs Romeo that if he truly loves her, he should promise marriage and tell her when and where to meet. The nurse calls her a second time and Juliet exists. Romeo is about to leave when she emerges yet a third time and calls him back. In scene 2, Friar Lawrence is out collecting herbs when Romeo arrives. Romeo quickly tells him that he has fallen in love with Juliet Capulet. The friar is surprised to hear that Rosaline has been forgotten about so quickly, but is delighted by the prospect of using this new love affair to unite the feuding families. Now in scene 3, Benvolio and Mercutio speak about Romeo's disappearance the night before. Benvolio tells Mercutio that Romeo did not come home at all. Romeo arrives and soon engages in a battle of wits with Mercutio, who is surprised by Romeo's quick replies. He says, "Now art thou, so Cybele, now art thou, Romeo," he unquotes. Juliet's nurse arrives with her man, Peter, and asks to speak with Romeo. Mercutio starts making sexual jokes about the nurse, but finally exits with Benvolio. The nurse tells Romeo her mistress is willing to meet him in marriage. Romeo indicates the nurse should have Juliet meet him at Friar Lawrence's place that afternoon. Now in scene 4, Juliet eagerly awaits her nurse and news from Romeo. The nurse finally arrives and sits down. Juliet begs her for information, but the nurse comically refuses to tell her anything until she has settled down and gotten a back rub. She finally informs Juliet that Romeo awaits her at the chapel where Friar Lawrence lives. In scene 5, Romeo and Friar Lawrence are in the chapel waiting for Juliet to arrive. The friar cautions Romeo to love moderately. Juliet soon appears and Friar Lawrence takes the two young lovers into the church to be married. Now the analysis of Act 2. In this, the interaction and conflict of night and day is raised to new levels with the second act. Benvolio states that blindness is love and best befits the dark. In reference to Romeo's passion and where Romeo finally sees Juliet again, he wonders. He quotes, "But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon," he unquotes. Romeo then invokes the darkness as a form of protection from harm. He quotes, "I am night's cloak to hide me from their eyes," he unquotes. This conflict will not end until the disorder of the day eventually overcomes the passionate nights and destroys the lives of both lovers. It is worthwhile to note the difference between Juliet and Rosaline. Juliet is compared to the sun and is one of the most giving characters in the play. "My bounty is as boundless as the sea, my love as deep. The more I give thee, the more I have, for both are infinite." End quotes. Rosaline, by contrast, is said to be keeping all her beauty to herself to die with her. This comparison is made even more evident when Romeo describes Rosaline as a Diana, the goddess of the moon, and says to Juliet, he quotes, "Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon," he unquotes. The balcony scene is more than a great lovers meeting place. The balcony scene is more than a great lovers meeting place. It is in fact the same as if Romeo had entered into a private Eden. He has climbed over a large wall to enter the garden, which can be viewed as a sanctuary of virginity. Thus, he has invaded the only place which Juliet deems private, seeing as her room is constantly watched by the nurse or her mother. One of the interesting things which Shakespeare frequently has his characters do is that they swear to themselves. For instance, when Romeo tries to swear by the moon, Juliet remarks that the moon waxes and wanes and is too variable. Instead, she says, "Or if thou wilt, swear by the gracious self." Shakespeare often has characters encouraged to be true to themselves first, as a sign that only then can they be true to others. Now, again, note the change in Juliet's behavior. Whereas she used to obey the authority of a nurse, she now disappears twice, and twice defies authority and reappears. This is a sure sign of her emerging independence and is a crucial factor in understanding her decision to marry Romeo and defy her parents. There is a strong conflict between the uses of silver and gold throughout the action. How silver sweet sound lovers, tongues by night, and lady, by yonder blessed moon I vow, that tips with silver all these fruit tree tops. Silver is often invoked as a symbol of love and beauty. Gold, on the other hand, is often used ironically and as a sign of greed or desire. Rosaline is thus described as being immune to showers of gold, which almost seem to be a bribe. When Romeo is banished, he comments that banishment is a golden X, meaning death would have been better, and that banishment is merely a euphemism for the same thing. And finally, the erection of these statues of gold at the end is even more a sign of the fact that neither Capulet nor Montague has really learned anything from the loss of their children. So, one of the central issues is the differences between youth and old age. Friar Lawrence acts as Romeo's confidant, and the nurse advises for Juliet. However, both have advice that seems strangely out of place given the circumstances of the play. For instance, Friar Lawrence says to Romeo, "Wisely and slow, they stumble that run fast." He also advises Romeo to therefore love moderately. The insanity of this plea to love moderately is made ludicrous by the rapid events which follow. In fact, by the end of the play, we even see Friar Lawrence rejecting his own advice and stumbling to reach Juliet's grave before Romeo can find her. How oft tonight have my old feet stumbled at graves? Now, Act 3 or Scene 1. Benvolio and Mercutio are on a street in Verona waiting for Romeo to arrive. While there, Tybalt and Petruchio see them and come over to provoke a quarrel. Tybalt is expressly looking to find Romeo, whom he wants to punish for sneaking into the mass party the previous day. Now Romeo arrives and tries to be submissive to Tybalt by telling him that he harbors no hatred of the Capulet house. Tybalt is unsure how to deal with Romeo, but since Mercutio is provoking him to a duel, he draws his sword and attacks Mercutio. Now Romeo draws his sword and intervenes too late to stop Tybalt from stabbing Mercutio. Now Tybalt and Petruchio then exit the area. Mercutio leaves the stage with Benvolio, who soon returns to tell Romeo that Mercutio has died. Romeo vows revenge on Tybalt, who soon reappears to fight with him. In the duel, Romeo kills Tybalt. Benvolio tells Romeo to run away before the prince arrives. The prince, followed by the Montague and Capulet families, shows up at the scene. Benvolio tells him the entire story, but the prince refuses to believe that Romeo is guiltless. Now he banishes Romeo from Verona, threatening to kill him, and should he return. Now in scene 2, Juliet delivers one of the most elegant soliloquies in the play about Romeo, when she is hoping to receive news about. Her nurse enters with the news of Tybalt's death and Romeo's banishment, but as in the previous scene, refuses to immediately tell Juliet what she knows. Instead, the nurse lets Juliet believe that it is Romeo who has been killed. Now, when the nurse finally reveals the truth to Juliet, Juliet immediately chides Romeo for pretending to be peaceful when in fact he is able to kill Tybalt. She then recants and tells the nurse, "Shall I speak ill of him? That is my husband." Juliet laments the fact that Romeo has been banished and indicates that she would rather have both her parents kill them than see Romeo banished. The nurse promises to go and find Romeo and bring him to Juliet's bed that night. She tells Juliet that he is hiding with Friar Lawrence. Now, Juliet gives the nurse a ring for Romeo to wear when he comes to see her that night. In scene 3, Friar Lawrence tells Romeo that he is banished from Verona and that he should be happy that the prince was willing to commute the death sentence. Now, Romeo considers banishment worse than death because it means that he can never see Juliet again. When the friar tries to console him, Romeo says, he quotes, "Wert thou as young as I, Juliet thy love, then mightst thou speak." He unquotes. The nurse enters and finds Romeo on the ground weeping. She tells him to stand up. Romeo is so upset by the events that he starts to stab himself, but the nurse snatches away the dagger. Friar Lawrence tells Romeo that he should be happy, since he and Juliet are still alive and want to see each other. The friar then gets Romeo to go see Juliet that night, with the expectation that Romeo will run away to Mantua the next morning. In scene 4, the Capulets and Paris are preparing for bed even though it is almost morning. Old Capulet decides right then that Juliet will marry Paris. He comments, "I think she will be ruled in all respects by me." He tells Lady Capulet to speak to Juliet about the matter immediately before going to bed. In scene 5, Romeo and Juliet are in her bedroom as daylight approaches. They pretend for a short minute that it really is still there, that it really is still the night, but the nurse arrives to tell Juliet her mother approaches. Now Romeo descends from the balcony to the ground and bids her goodbye. Lady Capulet tells Juliet she has to cheer her up. News about the planned wedding with Paris. Now Juliet tells her that she would sooner marry Romeo rather than Paris. Capulet himself enters and becomes furious when Juliet refuses to marry Paris. He calls Juliet young baggage and orders her to prepare to marry Paris the upcoming Thursday. Now Lady Capulet refuses to help Juliet, and even the nurse tells her that Paris is a fine gentleman whom she should marry. Now Juliet kicks out her nurse and prepares to visit Friar Lawrence as the nurse leaves Juliet and calls her ancient damnation.